Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a bitter cold Saturday morning. I don't know about you all, but I was pretty cold last night. Hopefully everyone's warming up. So we're really excited to share the valuable information on the Zoom, on the class tool with you all this morning. My name is Krista Griffith. I'm one of the quality support specialists on the Sparks team. I'm going to be here supporting Nikki Bearer today to facilitate the training with her. We appreciate your patience if we need to work through any of the technical kinks of the Zoom world, which is always fun. I'm still pretty new as a Zoom host and a facilitator, so I appreciate your grace if we work through things. I'll let Nikki introduce herself. But before that, I want to share a couple of quick messages that will hopefully keep things organized and operating pretty smoothly during the session. Bear with me while I kind of toggle back and forth here. All right, so you will be receiving credit for your attendance as long as you used your own BFIS number when you registered for the trainings. You don't have to enter your BFIS number in the chat box today. So let's see, another quick message is in the chat box, I'll also put a link where you can request Spark services such as the scored assessments, unscored assessments, coaching services, things like that. So if you need to reference it, just kind of scroll back to the top of the chat box. But by all means, if you need, you couldn't find it or whatever, just reach out and I'll throw in another link to those things. Please remember to remain muted just to reduce noise conflicts. We encourage you to engage with us in the following ways. So if you do have content-specific questions, feel free to use the raise hand function. That's located in the bar at the bottom of your screen. And a host will unmute you when Nikki pauses. She'll do that frequently throughout this training series after different sections. So you'll have an opportunity then. And otherwise, put any questions, comments, or technical issues in the chat box. A host will do their best to address them in the order that they were asked. And I'll also put these instructions in the chat box just for ease of reference if you're like confused on kind of how to reach out. Okay, just people are kind of coming in through the waiting room here. So let's see. I think at this point, for those who are just joining, I'll kind of put some instructions that I just mentioned in the chat box. And right now I'll pass it to Nikki so she can introduce herself and jump right into the class Toddler tool.
Great. Thank you so much, Krista. As Krista said, welcome everybody. I'm so grateful that you've taken some time out of what I am sure is a coveted Saturday morning to join us as we talk a little bit about the Toddler Classroom Assessment Scoring System, or the CLASS tool that we'll be using to help programs with their adult-child interactions. My name is Nikki Bear. I am the program manager and lead assessor for the Sparks team through the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children. I have been in the field of early education since 2001. And during that time, I have held a variety of titles. I've been an assistant teacher, a lead teacher, a director. I've worked with infants, toddlers, preschoolers. I've been a mentee teacher, a mentor teacher. And I've also spent some time in the previous STAR system as an assessor from 2019 to 2022 when they decided to revamp the process. And I'm so grateful to be back doing this work that I really love. And I'm looking forward to sharing my knowledge of the CLASS tool with you all this afternoon, or this morning. Sorry, excuse me, I'm rushing the day here. So we are going to move on here. And today, as we're meeting together, we're going to talk a little bit about the CLASS measure. We're going to talk about what CLASS is, why the Child Development Division, some of the reasons that the Child Development Division chose this tool to help increase quality interactions in the early childhood setting. We're going to talk specifically about the Toddler class framework. We're going to talk about the domains that make up the tool, the dimensions that make up the tool, and then we're also going to talk about the indicators and behavioral markers that we look for when we visit programs to perform assessments. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we as assessors score a class observation, just so you sort of have that information in your back pocket. And then we're also going to talk about what scored observation procedures and sort of what it looks like when an assessor comes to visit your program. And so that's sort of what our schedule is for the morning while we're together. So when we think about the classroom assessment scoring system, a lot of people right now are wondering what exactly it is. And it's a tool that measures the effectiveness of interactions between educators and children. Through studies, Teachstone, who is the parent company of the CLASS tool, has compiled data that shows that many programs across the country have low or moderate levels of effective interactions with children. Effective interactions between adults and children lead to better outcomes as children grow in a variety of developmental arenas, including cognitive development, behavioral development, and social development. So as early educators learn more about this tool and learn how to support these outcomes by incorporating strategies found within the tool, children do better. They grow better, and then as they enter more formal education settings, they're better prepared to meet the challenges of those classrooms. And I think one of the big pieces to keep in mind when we're talking about the CLASS tool is that small changes really do create real change within the lives of the children that you guys interact with on a daily basis. So as you identify small areas where you can start incorporating some of these tools and strategies into your interactions, you're going to net real difference in the lives of the children that you work with and interact with. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the results of one sorry, my tongue is not working today, longitudinal study that Teachstone completed. Researchers followed a cohort of children from birth through third grade. And what they found is that children who experienced effective interactions during the first 5 years of their life displayed more advanced language and cognitive skills upon kindergarten entry. And then they followed these children through first grade, and these same children were found to have more advanced short-term memory development. And then finally, when they entered third grade, these children displayed stronger math, vocabulary, and memory skills. So effective interactions within the early years really do matter. And this is one, excuse me, sorry. This is just one of the many reasons why the Child Development Division has chosen the CLASS tool for its STAR system. And we're going to explore a couple other reasons as well. I think one of the most important reasons for choosing CLASS is that the CLASS tool is grounded in child development. All of the domains, the dimensions, the indicators, and behavioral markers that we're going to talk about today are based on what we know to be developmentally appropriate practice for children within the age range specified by the tool. Another reason for choosing the CLASS tool is that it takes into account the differences that we find across classrooms and programs. Children who receive care in a nature-based program should be experiencing the same quality of interactions as children who are being cared for in a Montessori-based environment or a play-based environment. This tool effectively measures interactions in any type of early childhood environment, regardless of program philosophy. And so I think that that's another great reason to use this tool over some of the others that were looked at. And one of the last reasons that the class tool was chosen is that it looks specifically at the effectiveness of teacher-child interactions, which we know that over time, the best indicator of child success is having positive relationships with early caregivers. And so the class tool looks at these indicators and helps teachers to identify areas for improvement. When we come into your program, we're looking to see how teachers interact with children and how children interact with each other. We're not coming into programs counting the number of blocks that you might have. We're not looking at the number of chairs that you have on around your tables based upon the number of children within your care. We don't care about how much space that you have in your dramatic play area. We are just there to observe the many ways in which educators interact with children, and based on that feedback, we give you ways in which you can make small changes to really help the children within your programs to have more effective interactions. And so I think that also sorry, my words just sort of stopped on me right there. I hate when that happens. And so another piece of that is this tool is all within the control of the educator. Those other things that we just talked, the size of your classroom, the scope of materials. Sometimes those things are out of the control of the teacher in the classroom. When we're talking about interactions, that is all within the control of the educator. And so that's one of the other reasons that I think class is the tool of choice. It's why we use this tool. So a lot of people, also wonder, how does this process work? Why the class approach? I think much like the new STARS continuous quality improvement plan that we're all learning about together, the class tool really encourages teachers to collect observation data and to then use that data to impact child outcomes, as we've talked a little bit about already. And so how is this done? So a trained class observer like me is going to come into your program. We're going to observe the interactions that are happening between teachers and children and between peers. And then we're going to identify some areas for improvement through that classroom observation. We're going to share that data with the program director, who is then going to be able to assist staff in looking for specialized professional development in order to improve that skill during his or her interactions with children. And then as the new skill is put into practice, the hope is that interactions between teachers and children will become more effective, which is going to lead to better child outcomes. And then as you're engaged in that cycle of identifying goals and areas to work on, then the STARS, the STARS assessors come back again, and we observe the classroom environment again, and then we give new feedback, and you're able to start the process all over again. So it's very cyclical, just like the new STARS continuous quality improvement plan is. And so I think that's kind of nice that the two kind of work hand in hand and sort of follow the same process. All right, so that's the background information on sort of why the class tool, some of the important aspects of the class tool. Now we're really going to jump in and we're going to look specifically at the Toddler CLASS Tool. So the Toddler CLASS Tool describes two domains of effective teacher-child interactions. So within the Toddler tool, we're looking at emotional and behavioral support. So how teachers support children in those two arenas. And then we're also looking at how teachers demonstrate engaged support for learning. And so we're going to spend some time defining each of those domains. Within each domain, there are smaller dimensions that we look for with their own indicators and behavioral markers. And we're going to talk our way through each one of those as we go through the entirety of the Toddler CLASS tool. All right, so let's start with what is emotional and behavioral support. So when we're thinking about emotional and behavioral support, what we're looking for is we want to see how teachers help children develop warm and supportive relationships within the classroom. What tools and techniques do they use to help children do this? We're looking to see how teachers help children develop an enjoyment of and an excitement about learning. We want to see how teachers help children develop a motivation to engage in learning activities. We're looking to see how teachers help children develop feelings of comfort in the classroom. We're looking to see how teachers help children develop appropriate levels of autonomy. We all know those young toddlers are me do it. And so how do teachers support that type of desire within the classroom environment? And then we're also looking within this domain to see how teachers help children to develop skills that help them regulate their own behavior. So those are the main pieces and parts of emotional and behavioral support, that domain. This domain is broken down into 5 separate dimensions. The dimensions within emotional and behavioral support are positive climate, negative climate, teacher sensitivity, regard for child perspectives, and behavior guidance. And now we're going to spend the next few minutes going through each one of these dimensions and describing the indicators and the behavioral markers. So we're describing what we're looking to see teachers doing to help children learn and develop these skills. Okay, so let's start with positive climate. So positive climate reflects the connection between the teachers and children. It should come across as a warmth. We should see respect in the classroom, enjoyment. We should hear verbal communication and see nonverbal interactions that indicate relationships are being built between teachers and children and between peers. So one of the first indicators that we look for under positive climate is relationships. And within this indicator, what we're really looking for are teachers within close physical proximity to children. So if children are playing on the floor, are teachers near them? Can they see them? Can they interact with them? If children are sitting at a table, is a teacher sitting with them? Another piece that we look for is matched positive affect. So if children are smiling and happy, are teachers smiling and happy? Does the feel of it, is the feel of the classroom matched in facial expressions? We also look for reciprocal interaction. So if children are playing on the floor, are teachers engaged with children as they play? Or are teachers off taking care of teacher tasks and not really aware of what children are doing and engaged with them as they do it? And the final piece that we look for underneath the relationship indicator is peer connections. How are children learning to work together? Do teachers support them in using their words with one another? Do teachers support them in problem solving together? What do the interactions between children look like, and how do teachers help to support those interactions? The second indicator underneath positive climate is positive affect. And so again, this is all about facial expressions and the feelings or emotions that teachers are sharing with children. So as we're observing in a classroom, do we see people smiling? Do we hear people laughing? Are children and teachers enthusiastic about what's happening in the classroom? Do we hear teachers verbally sharing affection, in hearing teachers say, I'm so happy you're at school today. I'm glad to see you. I'm glad you're one of our friends. How do we hear teachers sharing joy and affection with children? We also look for ways in which teachers share physical affection with children. Do teachers allow children to sit in their laps? Do teachers rub children's backs gently? If children are upset, do teachers hug children? How are teachers physically interacting with children, as well as that verbal interaction? The final piece of positive climate, the final indicator, is respect. And so how do teachers show respect to the children that they're working with? What kind of voice do they use when they're speaking with children? Is it a warm and calm voice, or do we hear a more gruff, loud voice? So how are we hearing teachers interact with children? What type of language are teachers using with children? Do we hear teachers saying please and thank you? Do we hear teachers using the children's names as they move about the classroom and interact with children? Do we hear excuse me? So what kind of language what kind of language are teachers sharing with the children in their group? And then the final piece is eye contact. So how are teachers making eye contact with children as they're speaking with them? And then another piece of respectful language and communication that I failed to mention is, are teachers warning children before moving them or acting upon their bodies? So if a child needs their nose wiped, does a teacher say, I'm going to wipe your nose before wiping the child's nose? You need a diaper. I'm going to pick you up and take you to the diaper changing table. So do teachers communicate an intent before moving children to another area of the classroom or before acting upon their bodies? Okay, that's positive climate. I think I'm going to pause for just a second. Krista, are there any questions thus far that we should pause to answer?
I have, excuse me, I haven't gotten any in the chat, and on my end, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure we're getting those. I realized I forgot to stop before we transitioned from the beginning stuff into the actual tool. So I will try to be more mindful of that. And everyone, please remember, yeah, questions, raise your hand, chat box. We really want to make sure that you guys get your questions answered today. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second dimension within emotional and behavioral support, and that is negative climate. Negative climate, this dimension reflects the overall level of expressed negativity in the classroom. And these are things that this is the one dimension. These are things that we don't want to see happening in the classroom. So we're looking to see if teachers are expressing negativity, if children express a great deal of negativity, and we try to look at the frequency with which indicators of negative climate happen, the quality of the interaction, how people walk away feeling, and the intensity of the teacher and child negativity are all things that we look for if we see any indicators of negative climate. And I will be quite honest and say that I have not been in a program where I have seen any real indicators of negative climate that have really affected the overall mood of the classroom. So the pieces that we look for under negative climate, the first indicator is negative affect. So again, affect is all about those facial expressions. Do teachers appear angry? Do we hear a harsh voice being used? Do teachers show frequent irritability with children? Those are pieces that we look for within negative affect. The next piece, punitive control. So do teachers yell at children? Do teachers threaten children? Do we notice any physical actions or punishment toward children? And as I said, have never been in a classroom across the state where this has been something I've observed, but I think it's important for you guys to understand all of these pieces and parts. The next indicator of negative climate is teacher negativity. This includes, I would say this would be the one indicator where sometimes we do hear this within classrooms. And the sort of behavioral marker that we frequently hear would be a sarcastic voice or maybe a sarcastic statement being directed toward a child. Children don't understand sarcasm. And so that's a piece that we really don't want to hear. We don't want to hear or see that happening in classrooms. Teacher negativity also includes teasing children or humiliating children. And again, that's all about observing how a comment that might be made affects the child. How does the child leave that interaction feeling? And that's sort of what helps us to make a determination there. And then the final piece of negative climate is child negativity. So we switch from the teacher and looking at behaviors of the teacher to this final indicator. We look at the children. Do we see a lot of peer disputes happening in the classroom? So are children fighting with each other, having a really difficult time sharing on a frequent basis with no adult support? Do we see escalating frustration on the part of the children in the classroom? And then the final piece of that, do we also see an escalating negativity among the children in the space? So those are the main pieces of negative climate that we see in classrooms. And again, these are behavioral markers and indicators, things that we don't want to see happening in classrooms. This is sort of the only dimension within this tool that of things that we don't want to see happening in classrooms. All of the other dimensions these are things we want to see, but negative climate, we want to see an absence of these behaviors. And because of that, when we start talking about scoring, negative climate is scored sort of backwards. All of the other dimensions, high scores are 7. So for negative climate, we want to see 1s as sort of the baseline score. Just so everybody's aware of that. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to scoring, but I just thought I would mention that here. All right, the next dimension in the Toddler tool is teacher sensitivity. Teacher sensitivity encompasses the teacher's responsiveness and awareness of the children's individual needs and their emotional functioning within the classroom. And we also sort of look for the extent to which the teacher is available as a secure base to children. And some of the indicators that we look for in terms of teacher sensitivity are Are the teachers attentive to children throughout the classroom? So I'm sure, as all of you are very well aware of, there are some children in our classrooms that demand attention, and there are other children in our classrooms who are very able to find an activity that engages them, and they could sit there all morning at that, at that Play-Doh table or whatever the activity might be. And so how is the teacher aware of not only those children who maybe vocally demand their attention, but how is that teacher also aware of the child who sits quietly at a table engaged in an activity? Another piece of awareness, how do teachers notice difficulties that arise in areas of the classroom where they might not be sitting? So are teachers scanning the classroom to see where all of the children are? Do they notice when children might start to have issues sharing a toy? Do they notice children who are upset or sad or angry? Are teachers aware of all of the children in the classroom and able to recognize when they might need teacher assistance? The second indicator of teacher sensitivity, we talked about awareness. Now we're going to look at responsiveness. So are teachers able to be aware of the emotional and developmental needs of children in the classroom? And then the second indicator, the second piece of teacher sensitivity, is how do teachers respond to the bids or the cues that they see coming from children? So how do teachers respond to children's bids for attention? Are teachers able to get up from an activity they might be engaged in with one child to go help those children who might be having a hard time sharing the cars? Do teachers acknowledge and accept the emotions of the children in their classroom? And I think this is a big one. And it's also, I think, one of the easier pieces to sort of incorporate into our interactions with children. When children are sad, do we acknowledge that? Do we say for them, "Oh, I can see that you're sad"? Do we label that emotion and help them to understand that it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to feel frustrated, it's okay to feel mad? So we acknowledge that emotion, we accept that emotion, and then we provide comfort. We help children find ways to deal with those emotions and to process those emotions, and let them know that our classrooms are safe spaces for them to feel these big emotions that they have. The final indicator of teacher sensitivity, again, is one of those indicators where we switch from looking at what the teacher does in the classroom to looking at how the children interact within the classroom. And we look at child comfort as the final indicator of teacher sensitivity. So we look to the children to see, do they freely approach teachers? Do they participate in classroom activities? When they need help, do they know that they can go to their teacher and get the support that they need? And when they have problems, are they able to find genuine problem resolution with the teachers in the classroom? So that might not mean that they immediately get their way, but are teachers able to assist children in solving problems in a way that helps everyone to move on and to continue to engage in the classroom? Okay, those are the pieces of teacher sensitivity. We have two more. We're going to go through two more dimensions of the Toddler CLASS tool, and then we'll pause for questions again. So just so everybody's sort of aware of where we're at. So the fourth dimension within emotional and behavioral support is regard for child perspectives. And so this dimension captures the degree to which teachers' interactions with children and with the classroom activities really emphasize the children's interests, motivations, and points of view, and encourage children to be independent within the classroom. This is sort of the me do it dimension. And so some of the pieces that we look for within this dimension when we're observing in classrooms are child focus. How does the teacher follow the lead of the child during interactions? Are children able to make choices in the classroom? Do teachers seek out children's ideas, allow children to express themselves? So is the focus of the classroom on the children and what they need and what their interests are, or is it more teacher focused and more based upon what the teacher feels to be more needed at the time? Some great examples of child focus and sort of providing those choices, and some of the bigger things that we see, for instance, are if at snack time, are children able to choose where they sit at the table? If during sorry, my brain just kind of went blank there. I was trying to think of a couple more. If you're having, if you're singing in the classroom with children, do you provide choices to children for what the song might be? You know, we could sing the Itsy Bitsy Spider, or we could sing the Wheels on the Bus. Which song would you like to sing? Providing that choice. If you are reading a book with children, are children able to choose the book that's going to be read? And sometimes with older toddlers, you're starting to move into more of maybe a circle time in your classroom. So if there are theme books that you're reading, can children choose between two theme books, or does the teacher just choose what the book is that's going to be read during that more organized time? So those are sort of some of the pieces, some of the areas where we see child focus within classrooms that we observe. The second piece of regard for child perspectives is flexibility. Do teachers allow movement and talking? So for instance, if you are having a circle time with children, are children allowed to sit how they want to on the floor, or do they have to sit crisscross applesauce? If children need to wiggle in their chairs a little bit at snack time, are they able to do that? Are children able to move about the classroom and engage in activities as they desire? These classrooms who score higher in regard for child perspective tend to have a more go with the flow type feeling. So children really are just able to move about and engage with materials in ways that are meaningful for them. With flexibility, the last piece of flexibility that we look for is how do teachers adjust pacing of an activity for individual children? So if you are engaged in a painting activity, maybe, and you know, other children are maybe further ahead, or maybe they're exploring paint in one way, but this child over here is more interested in exploring it in a different way. Is that child able to explore that material in a way that's meaningful for him? Basically what that means, you know, if some children need to go at a slower pace or need to do something in a different way, are teachers able to adjust the activity and allow children that experience? And the final piece of regard for child perspectives is the me do part, the support of independence. So we look to see, do children have responsibility in the classroom? So for instance, at a program I visited yesterday, the toddler room had a stool by the sink. So the children were able to access that sink independently and were very able to wash their hands. They had the responsibility to wash their hands. They were able to reach and access their water cups in another program that I went to visit. So you know, at cleanup time, our children asked to help with certain responsibilities. Are children able to take responsibility over certain aspects of their classroom? After snack, can they put their dish in a dirty dish bucket? What types of responsibilities do children have within the classroom? Another piece of this is support of self-care, and that's probably that goes along with the hand washing example I just gave. Having spaces in the classroom where children have the tools that they need in order to complete tasks individually. So having stools accessible, making sure they can reach the soap and the paper towels. So how do teachers support children as they start to learn about self-care? Are materials in the classroom accessible? That's another piece of supportive of independence. So are children able to reach play materials on shelves, and can they get them down? That's another piece of this. And then the final indicator of supportive independence is peer perspective taking. So how do teachers help children understand that other people in the classroom have feelings too? So for instance, you know, if a child hits another child with a toy, that moment when a teacher can say to that, you know, that really hurt your friend when you hit them with that toy. Or you know, acknowledging that we all have feelings, and that sometimes the actions we take affect others within our environment. Okay, the final dimension within emotional and behavioral support is behavior guidance. With behavior guidance, we're looking to see how the teacher promotes behavioral self-regulation in children by using positive approaches, by supporting positive behavior, and by guiding and minimizing problematic behavior. And so the indicators for behavior guidance include proactive. So how is the teacher proactive in monitoring behavior? So how does the teacher monitor behavior? Is the teacher able to communicate clear expectations to children? How do the children demonstrate an awareness of the expectations that the teacher has set? So, so when we think about that a little bit, you know, so if the teacher says, I need you, I need everyone to sit on the floor, that's the clear expectation. And then we look to see, how does the child complete that instruction? Is the child aware that they've been given an instruction, and are they able to follow through with the expectations set by that that communication? The second indicator of behavior guidance looks at how teachers support positive behavior. So one of the things we listen for is how teachers reinforce positive behavior. So that's as simple as, oh, I see you walking across our classroom. Thank you for walking. So that's when we see children doing something that we want them to do, we reinforce that by giving them some positive feedback. Even though we might reinforce positive behavior, there are always going to be those times when we need to redirect children. And so are our attempts at redirection effective? So when children make a choice that's less than thrilling, how do we redirect them, and do we do so in a way that changes their behavior and sets them in another course? When we give direct, we also listen for specificity in direction. So when a teacher gives directions to children, are they clear? Are they specific? So I want you to sit on the floor versus I want you to sit on the red carpet. So what's the specificity of the direction that's given to children? Is it clear enough for children to understand and follow? And then one of the bigger pieces of this, one of the bigger behavioral markers of supporting positive behavior is positive phrasing of desired behaviors. And this is one we see most frequently in classrooms. So instead of teachers telling children what they can't do teachers tell children what they can do? So instead of saying no jumping, do teachers say, I'd like you to walk? Or we walk in the classroom. So trying to get rid of those negative words like no and stop, and phrasing those directions in a positive way to let children know what they can do in our classrooms. The final piece of behavior guidance is, again, we sort of look toward the children. We look away from the teacher and toward the children for this final indicator, and it's problem behavior. So we look at children to make sure there's a minimal wandering happening during the observation, meaning, are children engaged in activities, or are they wandering around the classroom? We want to see minimal waiting. So are there lots of transitions where children are stuck waiting with nothing to do? That can lead to problem behavior. So we want to see classrooms where those transitions are more individualized. And the final piece that we look toward the children for is a lack of disruptive or potentially dangerous behavior. And we want to see children engaged in activities and using safe bodies. And so those are things that we look for in behavior guidance. All right, I'm going to take a pause here before we move on to our next domain and sort of the final few pieces of the Toddler tool. We'll take a pause and see if there are any questions that we need to answer at this point in time.
So it
Ashley,
looks like, yeah, Ashley's got a hand raised.
Hi there. I feel like my question doesn't 100% fit toddler. Maybe it borders into the pre-K domain a little bit, but our class is a very wide range at our center. We started with a 1-year-old, but we have a soon to be 4-year-old. So we have a spectrum. I guess I just wanted to ask and acknowledge that for one of our students in our classroom, she struggles with some behavioral, well, I shouldn't say behavioral, more social, emotional challenges. So I'm wondering if there's any room in these sort of assessments for children who might kind of be outside the normal expectations. So she doesn't struggle maybe being physical toward anyone, but sometimes her behaviors range sort of outside what any of the other students would express. So are these things kind of taken into consideration at all, or does it just sort of get blanketed into the average of the experience overall.
Yeah, I think some of the piece of this is that it is individualized to teachers and sort of how they respond to children. And so I guess one of the questions that I might have are some of these social emotional struggles, do they tend to, one of the big pieces that we sort of look for in behavioral guidance is, does the behavior that we're seeing, or does it take away from instructional time of other children? So does it sort of interrupt the flow of the day? And that might be something we would look for. But if teachers are aware of and able to respond to the needs of this child in a way that doesn't sort of distract the rest of the group, then it might not be something that would detract from behavior guidance. Does that make sense, Ashley?
It does. Yeah, I think more specifically, it kind of was on my brain during the negative discussion, or like the negative
Yes.
part of the classroom. I think because most of our students are so young, they tend not to really notice what's going on. But the student does have an aide that comes and visits every week and works on those like social cues and reactions. But while I would say 90% of the time she's functioning at a very like normal level, there are those moments where the extremes, which are probably triggered from sort of a tumultuous home life, they do enter the classroom and kind of can derail things slightly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that instance, it would be a lot of that would fall back onto teacher sensitivity. How does the teacher respond to that in a way? What's the teacher response to that? Are they able to help that child come back into regulation and join the group again? And what tools and techniques do teachers use to help the child do that? I think would be more of where we would go with that.
And Ashley, Nikki, if this is okay for me to chime in,
Yeah,
the
please. No, please.
assessor does numerous cycles. So, while perhaps there might be a period that might be sensitive in the day for a certain child, maybe it's during a certain transition, and perhaps those behaviors are a little escalated at that point, there's numerous other cycles that likely would kind of even out the playing field a little bit as far as typical behavior, typical responses, interactions between child and teacher. So I wonder if that piece of information could sort of answer a little bit of the question as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I would say too, the interactions don't tend to be an issue between student and teacher. It's more peer-to-peer that are a little bit more exaggerated and challenging. If that makes sense.
Yes. And so again, a lot of that would be, how do the teachers engage with that child to help, one, to keep other children safe, and how do they help her figure out ways to engage with other children appropriately. Like, I don't know that it would necessarily, a lot of it would just come down to how the teachers sort of would not necessarily be thinking about negative climate, looking at one child is probably not going to bring the score of that somewhere scary. Typically when we're talking about child negativity, is it like multiple children within the classroom? It's not going to be one child is having a struggle and is going to blow up that dimension for a classroom. And it sounds like you guys have some tools in place to work with her and to help her as she deals with this.
I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So Ashley, if that supports your question, if it doesn't, please feel free to chime back in, reach out, throw something in the chat box. For others as well, it seems like you all have a pretty good handle to where we're at so far, but please don't hesitate to raise a hand, throw something in the chat box. Chances are if you have a question, others do too. So.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to move on to the second domain within the Toddler tool. It's called Engaged Support for Learning. And so basically for this domain, we're looking to see how teachers help children to connect and integrate their learning through activities and within tasks and daily routines. We're looking to see how teachers use feedback to promote learning and to expand participation. And we're looking to see how teachers help children develop and expand their language skills. So within this domain, there are 3 dimensions that we'll talk about: facilitation of learning and development, quality of feedback, and language modeling. And I will say before we jump too far into this, there are some national trends that I feel teachers should be aware of. So nationally, and in our home state of Vermont, classrooms tend to score on the lower end of facilitation of learning and development and quality of feedback. Language modeling can sometimes be affected, but typically here in Vermont, we sort of see that in the mid-range of scoring. But I think it's important for people to know. I've done a number of assessments and I send my reports after with scores, and people are always very concerned to see their facilitation of learning and development and their quality of feedback scores. And I just want people to know it is not, that feedback that we're sending is not anything negative about you. That is a trend that we are seeing across the country. And it is an area in which the Vermont AUIC and the Sparks team are aware of. And we are engaged in conversations about how we can support educators across our state to work on building up the tools and the techniques and strategies found within these dimensions to help build those interactions between teachers and children. So it's something we're aware of, something we're working on, and I just want all of you to be aware of that too. So looking at facilitation of learning and development, this considers how the teacher facilitates activities that support children's learning and their developmental opportunities. And so for this, we have 3 indicators that we look toward when we're observing in classrooms. The first one is active facilitation. So how does the teacher provide opportunities for children to explore and to learn? How do teachers guide that exploration? How are they engaged with the children as they are using materials in the classroom? How does the teacher's involvement in children's activities support their learning and development? And so for this indicator, we're really looking to see how the teacher's facilitation provides intentional opportunities for children to learn and to grow. And so I think that's important for teachers to really think about and to be aware of. And sorry, I'm gonna so how I think one of the ways in which teachers can really engage in, sorry, my words just went again. I hate that. So thinking about teachers' facilitation of activities, you know, what types of questions do teachers ask as they're engaging with children with materials in the classroom? As you move into the pre-K tool, they get pretty specific about teachers asking how and why questions. And so since these tools build upon one another, that's a suggestion that I typically give toddler teachers. You know, how can you incorporate more how questions, more why questions to facilitate children's learning? Excuse me, how can you actively involve children in what you're doing in the classroom? So those are some of the big pieces of active facilitation. Expansion of cognition is the next indicator of facilitation of learning and development. And so this is really, when we think about this is how, I think the question we can think about here is, how do teachers encourage children to think? So when you're engaging with a child, how do you encourage children to use their thinking skills? So do teachers provide information to children? So if I saw a really great example of this at recently at a visit I was at, children were playing with some little cheetah figurines, and one of the children said something about a cheetah going slow, and another child said no. And so the teacher found a book in the classroom that had some information about cheetahs, and the teacher gave that, used that book to provide that further information to the children, to help them both understand that cheetahs go fast. Another piece of expansion of cognition is how do teachers relate information or relate what's happening in the classroom to what's happening in children's lives outside of the center. Those connections need to be pretty specific. But I'm just trying to think of a good example about that that I've seen recently. And sorry, my brain is going completely blank at this particular point in time. But typically when I'm trying to think, I was at a toddler visit yesterday, so I was trying to think if there was anything there that might fit. And I think this might be a good one. So yesterday, the children in the toddler room were eating snack, and one of the babies in the classroom next door started crying. And one of the toddlers said, "Baby's sad." And the teacher agreed and responded, "Yes, that baby is sad. Why do you think the baby might be sad?" And the child said, "Baby crying." And the teacher said, "Yes, that baby is crying. And that's how we can tell it's sad. But I think he's sad because he's new and his mom had to leave. He misses his mom." And so, and then the teacher ended with, "Do you get sad when your mom and dad have to leave?" And so this was a great example for a couple of reasons. It built upon what the child was saying and sort of provided some further information to her to help her understand that crying means that we're sad. Helped her to understand that the child was new to the center. She had said a little bit more about how he didn't really know anybody yet, and that might make him feel worried. And then relating to the child's life, you feel sad sometimes when your mom and dad leave too. And so making those really specific connections to what's happening in the classroom with what happens in the lives of the children and the feelings and thoughts that they have. Another piece of expansion of cognition is applying concepts or things that you're learning about in the classroom currently to activities and tasks that have already happened. So another great example of that happened yesterday in the classroom I was visiting. The children wanted to sing a happy song. And so the teacher said, would you like to sing If You're Happy and You Know It? And the children said yes, and they got to the part where you're singing If You're Happy and You Know It, Stomp Your Feet. And some of the children looked at the teacher like they weren't quite sure what that meant. And she said, remember yesterday when we were outside and we were stomping our feet in the snow? So that was a great tie between something the children had done yesterday and what they were about to do in the classroom on that day. So those are the types of connections we want to see teachers making for children. And the final piece of expansion of cognition is, how do teachers encourage children to use thinking skills? And so if children, you know, say, I'm trying to think of another good example, but some of that includes, you know, if children, if you ask the child a question of, you know, what color is this ball? And the child says red. One of the ways in which you can encourage them to use their thinking skills is to say, how did you know that? Or how did you figure that out? So asking those types of questions can really encourage children to think about what's going on up in the brain as they're engaging with you. The final indicator of facilitation of learning and development is children's active engagement. And this typically scores high for most programs, this indicator, because basically what we want to see here, again, this shifts from what the teachers are doing to what the children are doing. Are children able to manipulate and use the materials in the classroom in ways that are meaningful to them? It's one of the pieces we look for. Are children able to be physically involved in what they're doing? And are children able to be verbally involved? Are they able to share their thoughts and ideas as they're engaging with materials? And again, that is typically something that we see happening across classrooms. That is typically one area of this dimension that scores high in most programs. Okay, the next dimension in this domain is quality of feedback. Quality of feedback assesses the degree to which teachers provide feedback based on something the child has said or done that promotes learning and understanding and expands a child's participation in an activity. Again, this is one of the dimensions that typically scores low. Some facilitation of learning and development and language modeling can kind of flow between programs, but this is one that most programs do not score above a 3 in this dimension. And so some of the strategies that we look for in classrooms for teachers who are able to successfully integrate quality of feedback are the following. We look for scaffolding. Are teachers able to provide hints or verbal or physical assistance to help children achieve a task? So while children are practicing hand washing, does a teacher stand nearby, reminding them of the steps, prompting their thought processes? Okay, so you just put soap on your hands. What do we do next? And, you know, giving the child a second to think about that. And if they aren't able to answer that question, then we might provide that further hint and say, oh, we're going to scrub the soap around on our hands and make bubbles. That's the next part. So we want to see that scaffolding happening across the classroom, helping children to be able to accomplish tasks that they might not be able to complete all by themselves, having that little bit of a hint, that little bit of assistance from a teacher to make them successful. The second indicator in quality of feedback is providing information. And so this really includes teachers explaining, expanding, or clarifying something that a child has done. You build on what the child says or does to expand their learning and their participation. So if you ask a child to go wash their hands, but they head toward the table, how do you clarify that task for that child? How do you help them to understand what you want them to actually do? Or if a child says the sky is purple, how do you provide further information? How do you explain or clarify that misconception for that child? How do you help them figure out that the sky is actually blue? How do you provide information to that child to help them create a further understanding, to help them move a little bit further in their development? And the final piece of quality of feedback, which this one can be a little tricky. The final piece is encouragement and affirmation. And so basically, how do we encourage children to be persistent in an activity? Or how do we affirm that they've completed a task? How do we let them know what they're doing, that we see what they're doing in the classroom, and that we've noticed their accomplishments? So this is a really individualized type of feedback. It's specific feedback to children. It's much more than a straight good job. Again, specificity comes into place here, and we really want to recognize a child's effort or accomplishment. So for instance, if a child takes care of their plate by themselves after snack, you can use the phrase good job, but you have to follow it up with that individual feedback. And you could say, good job, you took care of your snack plate all by yourself. Or I saw that you put your snack plate in the bucket by yourself. So it's really, really specific, individualized feedback that recognizes an accomplishment of a child or encourages a child to continue trying if something is difficult. And again, it has to be more than good job. There has to be further language tied to that.
Nikki, can I interrupt really quickly?
Yes.
We have a question in the chat box that I think others might benefit from your response as well. People are curious about some of these dimensions and indicators and how they're dealt with or scored for younger toddlers, where some of them might still be pre-verbal or kind of really just beginning with that kind of expressive language. And so just curious about how we take that piece into consideration, especially when it comes to, I think what Sarah was asking was regarding to like facilitation, expansion of cognition, those sorts of things. So Sarah, correct me if that's not the specific area, but basically it's that kind of pre-verbal. How do we take that into account?
And again, so we're really going to be looking within facilitation of learning and development. We're really going to be looking for that expansion of cognition piece. We're going to be looking to see how is the teacher recognizing what the child's doing, and then providing expanding on what they notice the child doing. So we're gonna, in language modeling, we're gonna talk about that next. And a lot, these three dimensions really kind of go hand in hand and engage support for learning. But with children who are nonverbal, who are not yet at that stage, how do teachers recognize what they're doing, what they're exploring, what they might be trying, what connections they might be trying to make in their brain, and how do teachers help them make those connections? How do teachers provide that additional information? So it's not, doesn't necessarily have to be based on what the child says. It can be based on what we see the children doing. I'm trying to think of a good example of this with a child who might not have said anything. Samantha, do you want to ask your question while I think about this for just a second?
I don't really have a question, just maybe trying to help explain a little bit easier. I do have
Samantha, it seems like you're a little frozen.
Okay, I was like, oh.
So feel free, Samantha, if you hear this, to drop it in the chat, or if you need to kind of come back in, we can check back in with you afterwards.
Yeah, so I think some of this might expansion of cognition might be thinking about how can you build upon what children are doing. So how can you encourage children to practice problem solving? How can you help them build connections from past learning? And how can you enhance their thinking when you see children actively engaged in activities? So here, this might be an example. So if you see a child playing with buckets in the sand, and the teacher might comment on the bucket size or the amount of sand each bucket holds, that might be an example. That's an example of providing, you're providing some information to that child. So the child's playing with two different buckets. Oh, you have a red bucket and a yellow bucket. The yellow bucket is bigger than the red bucket. That might be an example of the type of providing information to children. When children are using, and that can be an example of an interaction that you might have with a child who's verbal or nonverbal. For instance, if children are playing with dinosaurs, you could maybe, ooh, what do you think that dinosaur might eat? How do these dinosaurs look the same? How do they look different? And just because children might not be able to answer those questions yet, but after asking your question, pausing to allow them to think about it for a minute, then you can follow up with the information that they need to answer those questions. Does that make sense and sort of answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. I know some of these can be a little difficult to think about specifically, and that's sort of, we're hoping to share some of that, bring some of that to you. Another thing that I might also suggest to programs and teachers to think about, let me see if I can unblur my camera for just a second. Hopefully you guys can see this. It's probably backwards because I didn't mirror my camera. But this is the Toddler class dimensions guide. This goes through and goes over each dimension in depth and provides some really great examples of what these different dimensions might look like in the classroom. I would definitely recommend that if programs are able to purchase those, that's a great resource to have. And again, those can be purchased at teachstone.com. And they have a dimensions guide for each one of the class tools, infant, toddler, and pre-K. And they tend to be pretty helpful. I use mine pretty regularly when chatting with programs. So, all right, let's look at the final dimension of the class tool. Then we're going to talk a little bit about scored assessments and what they kind of look like. And then we'll wrap up with any final questions that anybody has for the day. Language modeling, our final dimension, captures the quality and the amount of a teacher's use of language stimulation and language facilitation techniques to encourage children's language development. Oop, hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm getting messages on my computer that my internet is unstable. So hopefully we're good to go.
I can hear you, Nikki. There was a little shake there, but it seems like you're back.
Phew. Okay, good. Sorry. I hate when that happens. So the what we're looking for in language modeling, one of the first pieces is supporting, how do teachers support language use? So are there back and forth exchanges happening in the classroom? If children aren't yet able to respond, do teachers still make those attempts, pause to give the child time to think of a response, to think about the question, to think about what the teacher said, and then does the teacher continue talking? Are the responses of the teacher contingent upon, are they based on what the child has said? So if the child is talking about boats, does the teacher respond about boats, or does the teacher start talking about frogs? Like, are the teacher and the child talking about the same thing? Are they focused on the same thing? And then the final piece of supporting language use is the use of open-ended questioning. So we want to hear teachers asking children questions that require more than a one-word answer, or that have more, that can be answered in more than one way. You know, asking children questions like, how many do you see, or what color is that? Those are great questions, but they don't support as much language use as a question of, why do you think that turtle is on the sand? Why do you think? How do you know? Whatever, those more open-ended questions might be, they allow children to think about and use more language. The next piece of language, the next indicator in language modeling is repetition and extension. Again, this is, I think, one of the easier strategies within language modeling to really implement in your classroom. And so basically what it means is when a child does communicate something, even if it's only a word, does the teacher repeat the word that the child has said and then extend upon that, and elaborate on what the teacher said or what the child said? So if a child, if it's drop-off time and mom has left and the child says mama, does the teacher repeat mama and then extend that and say, yeah, mama had to go to work. How does that make you feel? So you've extended that, you've elaborated it, you've elaborated on that, you've repeated, extended, and elaborated. So that allows the child to understand that the word that they said was important, important enough for that teacher to repeat, and then the teacher provided even more language to that child for them to hear and to make those connections in their brain with what they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. So that's an important tool within language modeling that I think is one of the easier ones to put into practice in classrooms. The next indicator of language modeling is self and parallel talk. Self-talk just means that as teachers move about the classroom, they describe what they're doing as they're doing it. I'm going to the sink to wash my hands. I'm washing my hands. I'm getting my water bottle so I can take a drink. And then parallel talk just means that teachers describe what children are doing as they do it. Ooh, Johnny is sitting on the brown chair. Sarah is reading the Itsy Bitsy Spider, so just describing what children are doing as they do it. Again, allowing children to hear language being used in their environment. The final indicator of language modeling is advanced language. And this just what we're looking for here is we're looking at the variety of words that teachers are using. Are they using, simple words that the children can understand? And are they also incorporating some bigger words that might need a little bit of explanation? Are they using descriptive vocabulary? And descriptive just means instead of saying you have a ball, you have a blue ball, you have a blue bumpy ball. How do they describe items within the environment as they're talking to children? Another piece of advanced language is simply labeling what children are holding or using or engaging with in the classroom. Oh, you have a baby doll. You have a red train. So just labeling what children are using. And then the final piece of advanced language is connecting new words to familiar words or words that children already know. So, you might use the word, that dinosaur is gigantic. Gigantic means really big. So how do teachers make those connections for children to advance their language? Okay, we're gonna, those are the, all of the dimensions within the toddler tool. And I see that we're sort of getting toward the end of our time together. I think I'm gonna I'll really quickly go over scoring assessments and then I can be pretty quick. And then I do want anyone who needs to stay on to ask questions. More than happy to stay on. Scoring, this is really just a quick overview so that you guys sort of understand how scoring works. Scoring starts by note-taking. We come into your classroom, we observe. We use this score sheet provided by Teachstone. As you can see, it's got all of the dimensions of the toddler tool listed here. We make our notes about what we see in the column, in the boxes next to the dimensions. And then once we finished our cycle of observation, which is about 15 to 20 minutes for a toddler observation, we look at each one of the indicators and we assign an initial indicator range. So if we saw something frequently, we score it at a high. If we saw something sometimes, we score it at a mid. And if we didn't see it or we only saw it 1 or 2 times, we score it at a low. And then once we've assigned an initial indicator range, we use our manual to read through notes and to read through further descriptions to determine if that initial score, that initial range was correct. We confirm that range. And then based on the high, mediums, and lows that we have within each dimension, we assign that dimension a score over here. So if we have more lows, then the score is going to be in the low area, which is a 1 or a 2. If we have more mediums, it'll be in the mid range, which is a 3, 4, or 5. And if we have more highs, it'll be in the high range, which is a 6 or a 7. And that's a very, very brief overview of the class, of how we score a class assessment. And if people have more questions about that, we can definitely answer those. In just a second, I want to really quickly get to the 2 types of observations we provide. We provide consultations, which the QSS team, the quality support specialist, will come out and provide an unscored assessment, just so you can get used to the tool a little bit. And then we also offer scored assessments, which are what my assessment team provide to the field. Scored assessments that look a little different for center-based care and for family child care homes. For a scored assessment, we need to visit classrooms in a center from each age range being served. So infants, toddlers, preschoolers, whichever age ranges are served, we have to observe at least 1 classroom from each age range, and we need to make sure we hit a total of 50% of the program's total classrooms. We complete 4 cycles of observation per classroom we're observing. So each cycle consists of 15 to 20 minutes of observation and then 10 minutes of scoring. So it takes about 30 minutes for a full cycle. So that means we'll be observing for about 2 hours in each classroom. Classrooms are randomly selected by the assessor for a scored assessment. So basically, I send an email asking you to send me some information about your program, which includes all the classrooms and the teachers. I assign each classroom a number and then use a random number generator to select the rooms that I'll observe. In a family child care home, a scored assessment consists of 4 cycles of observation. Each cycle is 15 to 20 minutes and 10 minutes of scoring, just like in a center-based observation. The one difference is that in a family child care home or a classroom that's multi-age, we'll only be using the Toddler tool to complete assessments. The Toddler tool nicely combines the infant tool and the pre-K tool. And so we were attempting to do 4 cycles of observation for the age range that had the most children, and then 2 cycles of the other age ranges. It was just a lot. It was a long visit and a lot for the children and providers in family child care homes. And so we've made a change that mirrors more closely what Teachstone would have us do. It's important to note in a family child care home, at least 1 child needs to be awake and present for an observation to begin and take place. And because we're using the Toddler tool in family child care homes, observations can take place during outdoor playtime. If we're using the pre-K tool in a center-based observation, we are not able to score outside activities unless it's a specific activity. If it's just recess, children are typically engaged in more gross motor play, and therefore interactions aren't typically happening as frequently and as in depth. So we don't typically score for pre-K recess time. Okay, final piece. I think that's important. After the assessment, I will send a report to the program owner, administrator, director for each of the age ranges that I've observed. I go over the strengths and weaknesses that I observed. I give an overall domain score for each age range observed. So for the Toddler tool, you would get 2 domain scores. And then I also give overall dimension scores for each age range. So for the Toddler tool, there are 8 dimension scores. And then programs use this information to create their STARS CQI plan. And for programs that need further assistance, I also provide an opportunity to meet with me via Zoom after programs have received the report if they have questions or need to go over anything. And once programs start working on their CQI plan, if they feel that they need further assistance, they can reach out to our quality support team for coaching, mentoring, for any extra support that they feel they might need. Okay, I tried to breeze through that last part really quickly. Hopefully it all made sense. I just want to let you guys know if you have questions, if you want to sign up for a scored assessment or a consultation, you can either email info@vermontayeyc.org or you can visit our website, and you're able to do all of those things there. I want to thank you for joining us on a Saturday. And I'm sorry we went over by a few minutes. Anybody who's got questions that wants to stay on, I am more than willing to answer those. I want to make sure you guys have all of the information that you need in order to feel confident about this new system and this new tool that we're using. I do want to end by saying I really love the class tool. I think it's really important to remember that the pieces, the strategies that are involved in here are really within the power of the educator in the classroom. You guys are really able to sort of identify and to think, oh, maybe I'm not so great at that. That's the piece I want to work on. And sort of create those plans for yourselves to improve interactions in your classroom. And I think that's a really great to feel like you can be in control of that. One of the biggest things I love about this tool. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and open up the floor for questions.
Okay, I see one here in the chat box. Ashley, I heard that for home providers, you use toddler assessments for a wide age range, but I'm wondering which assessment you would use for a mixed age room in a center. We have primarily 2- and 3-year-olds, but we'll soon have 4-year-olds as well. Mostly curious, so I can recommend the right Zoom meeting for teachers I work with. Currently wondering if she should attend toddler or pre-K.
Toddler. We would use the toddler tool in that type of setting. So this would be the spot. Yes, no, people that need to hop off, I totally understand. We went over a little and I'm so sorry.
And for those who are still here, again, we really encourage you to reach out to Vermont AUIC to get connected with your quality support specialist so that we can just support you in any of these questions. We'll lean into Nikki and her team for specific questions as well. So please, that's why we're here. It's so exciting to have this available to you all. So take advantage.
Hi, Nikki. This is Jerry Barrows. I have a
Hi.
question.
Sure.
Hi. I have a couple of them actually. My STARS application is not due until 2025, but in May of 2025. But I would like to, have my assessment scored and everything as soon as possible to, to see where I'm at. Will that scored assessment still be good for when I renew in 2025, or would I have to have another one?
Yeah, that would be a good question for the STARS office. I would think that what would happen, like they would just adjust your, I think it's all dependent upon when you submit your STARS application information. So I wouldn't think you would need to have another one. You would just use information from this visit.
Okay. And you said family childcare, you do just the toddler one.
Yes.
So does that mean you still do 4 cycles on just the toddler? So are you still in there an hour and a half for observation and then 30 minutes for scoring?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then if I'm a 5-star provider and I want to remain a 5-star provider, would my scoring have to be all 6 and 7s?
So we're actually we're grateful that the pilot year got extended for stars because we're in discussions with the Child Development Division right now. The scoring that they've identified for 4 and 5-star programs is kind of unrealistic. And so we are in the process of communicating with them how we can change that because programs are typically within the toddler tool, programs are typically able to get those 6 and 7s within the emotional and behavioral support domain, but the instructional learning domain, that is an unrealistic score for anybody to achieve. So we are working with CDD to sort of adjust those scores and to sort of figure out what makes more sense.
Okay. And then my other question was listening to all of the like the language pieces and, talking back, forget off the top of my head here, but just talking with kids, it seems like the teacher is talking all the time. Is there a percentage of time that you're looking for the teacher to be interacting in this language piece with the children? Because I feel like the kids are losing some quiet time in order to extend their own learning, with what they're thinking. I feel like I would be interrupting the children all the time when I think it's important to, let the children think about what they're doing and move on with what they're doing as well.
Yes, and some of that's sort of the how we're observing, like what we're observing. So, I think it's clear in those times when the teacher sort of steps back a little bit to let, and that sort of comes in that teacher sensitivity piece of, oh, the teacher is noticing that the child might be overstimulated or the child's trying to process. And so the teacher gives the child space to do that. I think the big thing with language modeling is that if children are communicating, that they're being responded to, I think is the big piece. Like, it builds off the infant tool, and in the infant tool, if children communicate, there is an expectation that the teacher will acknowledge that the child has communicated. And so the toddler tool and language modeling is sort of building off of that. It's not necessarily always the frequency. We're also looking at the depth of the communication that's happening, and the quality, and the duration. So like if you have a 5-minute interaction with a child, that's gonna score you sort of on the higher end. That's an in-depth, long, back and forth conversation interaction with a child or a group of children. So there are a lot of factors that go into determining what the level of the interaction is.
Okay,
I'll highlight what Nikki said is it is that back and forth piece. It's not teacher dominated where you are talking all of the 5 minutes, so it is a little bit of that dance. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. When you talk about wanting there to be space for a child, that it's you being sensitive to, are you dominating that conversation? Are you leading it? Are you leading it, or are you asking questions so that they can lead it?
Okay, so I'm following the child. I'm not
Yes.
I'm just following the child. If they have a question, I'm answering the question. If there's a group of kids that are involved in this play that they've come up with, I'm not expected to go in and say, oh, what are you doing? It looks like you're doing this. It looks like you're doing that. I'm not expected to interrupt it in that way. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, like I think, if we're having like a 15-minute observation and like we only hear conversation happening for like 4 minutes, that's going to be a concern. But, we want to hear, again, it comes into like the depth, the type of words being used as you're communicating, the level of the interaction between the teacher and child. There are a lot of factors that go into that. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a constant like flow of consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If peers are facilitating the conversation amongst themselves, excellent, a great time to listen, a great time to observe. Perhaps so there might be circumstances or different situations where if it's not led, if the children aren't constructively communicating together, that could be where, you know, the facilitation comes into play, where that's when you jump in and you ask those thinking questions or you expand on their cognition. So Nikki, please correct me if that's not a fair example.
No, and I think that's the interesting piece where you look at how, you know, some of these dimensions sort of pieces and parts can fit in different dimensions. So, you know, the questions that you're asking in facilitation of learning and development also count in your language modeling dimension. And some of the quality of feedback that you're engaging in can fit in both of those categories. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And my last question was for family childcare, would you recommend that we study closely with mostly the toddler book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for joining us, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry.
Nan, did you have a question? Since I see that you have to go quickly. Oh, no.
It looks like we lost folks. Jerry, are you all set? Do you have any other additional needs? Okay, Jerry. Yep. All right. I'm gonna unrecord.
Yep.